At 8 o'clock that morning, Eleanor Vale had been dismissed from the only employment she possessed. By nightfall, she was standing before a decaying manor she had never known belonged to her family. Blackthorn Manor had broken windows, dead gardens, and enough unpaid taxes to frighten any sensible woman away. But Eleanor had nowhere else to go. Then she discovered something stranger. Every room in the manor had been abandoned for years, except one. Behind the locked door of the west wing, someone had recently replaced the candles. Eleanor did not know that yet. At that moment, standing beneath a cold October rain with one leather case beside her boots, she knew only that Blackthorn Manor looked considerably worse than the solicitor had described. Mr. Pembroke had called it in need of attention. The phrase now seemed almost criminally optimistic. Ivy smothered half the gray stone facade. Several roof slates were missing. One chimney leaned slightly toward the east, and the fountain in the circular drive had become a basin of black water and rotting leaves. Beyond the house stretched what had once been formal gardens. Now there were only twisted hedges, waist-high weeds, and skeletal rose bushes trembling in the wind. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter. 3 weeks earlier, she had believed her future secure. For nearly 5 years, she had served as governess to the daughters of Sir Reginald Harcourt, teaching French, arithmetic, history, and the sort of restrained manners respectable families expected of young ladies. She had been neither loved nor mistreated. She had simply been useful. Then, a silver brooch belonging to Lady Harcourt disappeared. It was discovered 2 days later, beneath the mattress in Eleanor's room. She had never seen it before. Lady Harcourt had looked at her with cold disappointment. Sir Reginald had avoided her eyes. By breakfast, Eleanor had been given her wages and ordered to leave. No inquiry, no references, no opportunity to defend herself. A governess dismissed for suspected theft could not easily find another household. Her aunt in Bath answered Eleanor's desperate letter with 4 polite sentences, explaining that there was simply no room. Then, as though Providence had decided to make one final wager on her survival, a letter arrived from a solicitor in Ashcombe. Her mother's elder brother, Alistair Vale, had died. Eleanor barely remembered the man. She had met him once as a child, a tall, severe figure who smelled of tobacco and rain, who had placed a silver sixpence in her palm and told her never to let another person decide what she was worth. He had left her Blackthorn Manor, and apparently very little else. The carriage driver who had brought her from Ashcombe Station refused to approach the front steps. "This is near enough, miss." Eleanor glanced through the rain. The entrance was another 100 yards away. "You were paid to take me to Blackthorn Manor." And there it stands. He would not look directly at the house. Eleanor noticed that. "You know this place. Everyone in Ashcombe does." And the driver tightened his hands around the reins. "Your uncle kept to himself. That is hardly unusual." "No, miss." Something in his answer made her pause. "What is unusual?" The man finally looked at her. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might answer. Instead, he climbed down, placed her case in the mud, touched 2 fingers to his cap, and returned to the carriage. "Best be indoors before dark." "It is already nearly dark." "All the more reason." The horses moved before Eleanor could ask another question. Within seconds, the carriage was rattling back toward the village. Eleanor watched until its lamps vanished among the trees. "Excellent," she murmured. She took her suitcase and approached the house alone. The great oak door was swollen from years of damp. The first key failed. So did the second. The third turned with a deep, metallic click. Eleanor pushed. The door opened reluctantly. Cold air breathed from the darkness. The entrance hall smelled of dust, wet stone, and old wood. She stepped inside. Her boots echoed beneath a ceiling 2 stories high. Portraits lined the walls, their faces obscured beneath gray sheets. A broad staircase curved toward an upper gallery. Cobwebs hung from the chandelier like funeral lace. Nothing moved. Nothing lived. For the first time since leaving the Harcourt estate, Eleanor felt the full weight of what had happened to her. No position, no reputation, no family willing to take her in. Only this dying house. Her house. She swallowed and placed the suitcase beside the stairs. "Well, Uncle Alistair," she said into the silence, "you have certainly left me a challenge." Something knocked overhead. Eleanor froze. Once. Then twice. A dull wooden sound from somewhere on the upper floor. She stared toward the gallery. "Rats," she whispered. The word sounded unconvincing. She found matches in her case and lit the small traveling lamp she had purchased in Ashcombe. Warm light spread across the entrance hall. To the right lay a drawing room layered in dust. To the left, a dining room in which 14 chairs stood beneath white covers. At the rear, she discovered the kitchen, an old pantry, and enough dry firewood to start a small blaze. Someone had stacked it neatly beside the hearth. Eleanor frowned. The solicitor had said Blackthorn Manor had been unoccupied since Alistair Vale's death 4 months earlier. Yet the wood was dry, more than dry, freshly split. She picked up one piece. Pale wood showed beneath the bark. Her unease returned. Mr. Pembroke must employ someone to check the property. That explanation was reasonable. She decided to believe it. After lighting the kitchen fire, Eleanor carried her lamp upstairs to find a bedroom. Most doors stood open. Dust covered everything. The first chamber contained a ruined mattress. The second had a cracked ceiling. The third smelled so strongly of damp that Eleanor closed it immediately. She continued along the gallery. Then she noticed the corridor extending west. Unlike the rest of the house, it was separated by a narrow wooden door. Eleanor pushed it open. Her lamp illuminated a long passage. 6 rooms stood along it. 5 doors were open. The 6th was at the very end, closed. She walked toward it. With each step, something felt increasingly wrong. At first, Eleanor could not understand why. Then she saw the floor. Dust lay thick along the corridor. Yet immediately before the final door, the boards were clean. Not perfectly clean. Disturbed. As though someone had stood there recently. Eleanor raised the lamp. 3 old iron locks were fixed to the door. All remained shut. Beside it stood a narrow wall table, and upon that table were 2 white candles. Eleanor stared at them. Everything else in Blackthorn Manor was covered in years of grime. These were spotless, new. One wick was black. She reached toward it, stopped, then touched the wax, still soft. Eleanor slowly turned toward the empty corridor behind her. Someone had lit that candle, recently. And whoever had done it might still be inside Blackthorn Manor. Eleanor did not move for several seconds. The tiny flame inside her lamp trembled, though there was no wind in the corridor. She looked again at the candle. The wick was blackened. A narrow trail of melted wax had hardened down one side. It had not been sitting untouched for 30 years. Someone had burned it. Recently. "Hello?" Her voice traveled the length of the west corridor. No answer came. Eleanor tightened her grip on the lamp. "If someone is here, I would prefer that you make yourself known." Silence. Then came the sound again. Knock, knock. This time it was closer, not above her, behind the locked door. Eleanor stepped backward. Every sensible instinct told her to return downstairs, lock herself in the kitchen, and wait for daylight. Instead, she lifted the lamp higher. "Who is there?" Nothing. She approached the door. The first iron lock was rusted. The second appeared older still. The third had been reinforced with a thick brass plate engraved with a small letter V. Eleanor touched the handle. It would not turn. Then something slid beneath the door. She nearly dropped the lamp. A folded piece of paper emerged slowly across the floorboards. Eleanor stared at it. No hand appeared. No shadow moved beneath the gap. Only the paper. She crouched carefully and picked it up. The sheet was old, yellowed at the edges. There were no words. Only a drawing. A simple charcoal sketch of Blackthorn Manor. One window had been marked with a dark cross. The west room. Eleanor turned the page over. Nothing. A cold sensation moved across the back of her neck. She backed away from the door. That was when a voice behind her said, "You should not be here." Eleanor spun. A woman stood at the entrance to the corridor. She was perhaps 60, dressed entirely in black, with silver hair pinned tightly beneath a dark bonnet. Rainwater shone on the shoulders of her coat. In one hand she carried a closed black umbrella, in the other, a ring of keys. Eleanor's fear instantly changed shape. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze moved from Eleanor to the folded paper in her hand. Something like alarm crossed her face. "My name is Agnes Bell. You entered my house without permission. I used the kitchen door." That does not answer the question. Agnes took one slow step forward. "I looked after this house for your uncle." Eleanor studied her. "Mr. Pembroke told me there was no resident staff." "There isn't. Yet you have keys." "I have had them for 22 years. Eleanor looked at the ring in Agnes's hand. "Did you light these candles?" The older woman's expression hardened. "No." "Then who did?" Agnes did not answer. Eleanor held up the drawing. "And who pushed this beneath the door?" For the first time, Agnes appeared genuinely frightened. "Give that to me." "No. Miss Vale. You arrive uninvited, refuse to answer my questions, and now you are ordering me about in my own house." Agnes stopped. The two women stared at each other. Then Agnes looked toward the final door. "You must leave the west wing." "Why?" "Because your uncle wanted it closed." "My uncle is dead. Some wishes remain important after death." Eleanor almost laughed. After the day she had endured, patience was becoming a luxury. "I have been accused of stealing something I never touched. I have lost my employment. Half of Ashcombe seems afraid to pronounce the name of this house, and now I discover fresh candles outside a room secured with 3 locks." She stepped toward Agnes. "So I think I have earned a better explanation than your uncle wanted it closed." Agnes's face softened slightly. "You have his temper. I barely knew him. He knew you." That stopped Eleanor. "What does that mean?" Agnes glanced down the corridor. "Not here." They returned to the kitchen. Agnes lit 2 additional lamps, opened cupboards Eleanor had assumed empty, and produced tea, bread, and a small jar of preserved apples. Eleanor watched her. "You have been keeping supplies here. Only enough for emergencies. For an abandoned house?" Agnes poured boiling water into the teapot. "For Mr. Vale. He died 4 months ago." Agnes said nothing. Eleanor sat across from her. "Tell me about the room." The older woman remained standing. 30 years ago, your uncle locked it." "Why?" "No one knows." "You do." Agnes looked at her sharply. "I know only that after that night, he dismissed most of the servants and forbade anyone from entering the west wing." "What happened that night?" "A woman disappeared." The kitchen seemed suddenly quieter. Eleanor set down her cup. "What woman?" Agnes hesitated. "Your uncle's younger sister." Eleanor frowned. "My mother was his only sister." "No." The answer came too quickly, too firmly. "Your mother was the only sister the family acknowledged." Eleanor stared at her. Agnes moved to the fire. "Her name was Beatrice Vale. I have never heard of her." "That was the intention." "And she disappeared from that room?" Agnes gave a slow nod. "On the night of October 17, 1859. Eleanor felt a chill. Exactly 30 years earlier. What happened to her? The family said she ran away. And you do not believe that? I believe your uncle spent the rest of his life making certain no one opened that door." Eleanor looked at the drawing again. Then perhaps he knew what happened. Agnes turned. "Your uncle knew many things. Did he kill her?" Agnes's face changed instantly. "No." The certainty surprised Eleanor. "Then why lock the room?" Agnes looked toward the ceiling. "Because whatever happened to Beatrice did not end when she disappeared." A sudden crash came from somewhere upstairs. Both women froze. Eleanor rose. What was that? Agnes did not move. Then came another sound, slow footsteps, crossing the floor above them. 1, 2, 3, heading toward the west wing. Agnes's face drained of color. She reached for Eleanor's wrist. You asked who lit the candles. The footsteps stopped. Directly above them, Agnes lowered her voice. I came here this afternoon. And? There were no candles outside that door. Eleanor looked toward the ceiling. The footsteps did not resume. For several seconds, Blackthorn Manor seemed to hold its breath. Then, Agnes released her wrist. You are leaving tonight. Eleanor turned to her. No. Miss Vale, I have nowhere else to go. There is an inn in Ashcombe. With what money? Agnes said nothing. Eleanor crossed her arms. This house belongs to me. If someone has been entering it, I intend to discover who. You do not understand what you are dealing with. Then help me understand. Agnes stared into the fire. The flames threw deep shadows across her face. When I first came to Blackthorn, I was 14. My mother worked in the laundry, and I helped wherever I was needed. Your grandfather, Charles Vale, was still master of the estate. Eleanor sat again. And Beatrice? She was 18. Agnes's expression changed at the name. She was unlike anyone else in the Vale family. Your grandfather believed a daughter should be quiet, obedient, and useful to whichever husband he chose for her. Miss Beatrice preferred books, horses, and arguing with men twice her age. Despite herself, Eleanor almost smiled. She sounds difficult. She was. Agnes looked at her. Rather like you. The smile disappeared. What happened? Your grandfather arranged for Beatrice to marry Lord Edwin Harrow. Eleanor knew the name. The Harrow family had once owned nearly half the land west of Ashcombe. Their fortune had collapsed decades ago. She refused, repeatedly. And my uncle? Alistair tried to help her. Agnes folded her hands. He was 23. He had no authority while his father lived, but he adored Beatrice. They had always been close. What about my mother? Margaret was only 12. Eleanor nodded slowly. Agnes continued. On the night before Beatrice was meant to leave for Lord Harrow's estate, there was an argument. With her father? With everyone. Agnes's voice had become quieter. I remember shouting from the west wing. Then something broke. Later, your grandfather ordered every servant downstairs. And Beatrice? No one saw her again. Eleanor felt the paper inside her pocket. The family said she ran away. Yes. Did anyone search? Not properly. Why? Agnes gave a bitter little laugh. Because respectable families often care more about scandal than truth. That sentence struck Eleanor harder than Agnes could have known. Lady Harcourt's expression returned to her memory. Not anger, not concern, embarrassment. The desire to remove an inconvenient problem quickly. What did Alistair believe? That Beatrice had not left voluntarily. Eleanor leaned forward. Then why did he keep the room locked? I never knew. Did he ever search it? Agnes hesitated. Once. When? The morning after she disappeared. And he came out 2 hours later, carrying a wooden box. After that, he locked the room himself. What was in the box? I do not know. The wind pressed rain against the kitchen windows. Eleanor stood. Where did he keep his papers? His study? Show me. Agnes's eyes narrowed. You are remarkably stubborn. I have been told so. That quality did not serve your Aunt Beatrice well. Perhaps because no one listened to her. Agnes had no reply to that. The study occupied the eastern side of the ground floor. Unlike the other rooms, it had not been stripped. Shelves filled 3 walls. Ledgers lay stacked on a broad mahogany desk. An enormous painting of Blackthorn Manor hung above the fireplace. Eleanor moved immediately toward the papers. Your uncle kept everything, Agnes said. Bills, letters, estate records. He trusted paper more than people. Eleanor opened the first drawer. Empty. The second contained sealing wax, pens, and a rusted pocket watch. The third was locked. Key? Agnes examined her ring. Not one I have. Eleanor crouched. The keyhole was small and unusually new compared with the desk. Someone replaced this lock. Your uncle, perhaps. Eleanor straightened. Then she noticed scratches along the edge of the desk. Not random scratches. Letters. She moved the lamp closer. Someone had carved words into the wood and later tried to sand them away. Most were unreadable. One remained. B-E-A. Eleanor touched the marks. Beatrice. Agnes stepped closer. I have never noticed that. Eleanor followed the scratches toward the side of the desk. There, almost hidden beneath the carved molding, was a tiny brass catch. She pressed it. A panel opened. Something fell onto the carpet. A key. Not a desk key, far too large. Old iron. Agnes recoiled immediately. No! Eleanor picked it up. A small brass tag hung from its ring. Stamped into the metal was a single letter. W. West, Eleanor whispered. Agnes grabbed her arm. Your uncle hid that key for a reason. Exactly. Eleanor. It was the first time Agnes had used her Christian name. Eleanor looked at her. What did you see 30 years ago? Agnes went still. What? You are not afraid because of village gossip. You were here. Agnes released her. For a long moment, only the rain could be heard. Then the old woman walked toward the fireplace. The night Beatrice disappeared, I was sent upstairs to collect linen. She swallowed. I passed the west corridor. And? The door was open. Eleanor waited. Agnes turned toward her. I saw Beatrice inside. Alive? Yes. With whom? Agnes's face tightened. Your grandfather. Eleanor's fingers closed around the key. What was happening? I could not hear everything. But you heard something. Agnes nodded. Beatrice was crying. What did she say? Agnes looked toward the doorway, as though 30 years had suddenly disappeared, and someone might still be listening. She said, You cannot bury a name and expect the truth to stay dead. Eleanor felt a strange pressure in her chest. What name? I never knew. Before she could ask more, a loud metallic sound rang through the house. Clank. Both women froze. Clank, clank. It came from upstairs. 3 distinct sounds. Agnes whispered, The locks. Eleanor was already moving. They hurried into the entrance hall and climbed the staircase. At the west corridor, Eleanor stopped. The candles were still there, but something had changed. The 3 iron locks on the final door were hanging open. Eleanor stared at the 3 open locks. Agnes whispered a prayer. Neither woman had touched them, yet each iron bar now hung loose against the door. Eleanor took the hidden key from her pocket. It suddenly seemed unnecessary. Do not open it, Agnes said. Eleanor looked at her. You just told me my aunt disappeared from this room. That is precisely why. And for 30 years, everyone has obeyed the same silence that allowed her to vanish. Agnes's face tightened. Some doors protect more than secrets. Or they protect the people who created them. Eleanor reached for the handle. Agnes caught her sleeve. Your uncle spent his entire life keeping this room closed. And then he left the house to me. That silenced her. Eleanor turned the handle. The door opened. A smell of lavender and old paper drifted into the corridor. Not decay, not damp. Lavender. Eleanor stepped inside. The room had been preserved. That was the first impossible thing. A narrow 4-poster bed stood against one wall beneath faded blue curtains. Books lined a shelf. A dressing table held a silver-backed brush, a porcelain perfume bottle, and several hairpins arranged neatly in a tray. Near the window sat a writing desk. There was dust, but far less than in the rest of the manor. Agnes remained at the threshold. This is not how it looked. Eleanor glanced back. What do you mean? After Beatrice disappeared, your uncle removed almost everything. Eleanor looked around. Then someone brought it back. Her attention moved to the fireplace. Fresh ash lay in the grate. She crouched. The ashes were cold, but not old. Someone had burned papers here recently. Eleanor found one surviving corner beneath a blackened log. 3 handwritten words remained. For Eleanor Vale. She stared at them. Agnes. The older woman approached reluctantly. Eleanor showed her the fragment. Agnes's face changed. Your name? Yes. The writing was elegant, slanting sharply to the right. Do you recognize the hand? Agnes did not answer. Eleanor looked up. Agnes. It resembles Beatrice's. Eleanor rose slowly. That is impossible. Yes. You said she disappeared 30 years ago. She did. I was not born until 3 years later. I know. Eleanor placed the fragment carefully on the desk. The mystery had now moved beyond family scandal. Someone had deliberately arranged this room. Someone had placed the candles outside. Someone had burned a letter bearing Eleanor's name. She began searching. The desk drawers contained ordinary stationery, dried ink, and several bundles of letters tied with ribbon. Most were addressed to Beatrice Vale. One name appeared repeatedly, Thomas Gray. Eleanor opened the oldest. My dearest B, I have spoken to the solicitor in York. If your father refuses again, we can leave before the Harrow marriage is announced. I have enough money for passage north, and no one need know until we are safely away. Eleanor read it twice. Who was Thomas Gray? Agnes lowered herself into the chair by the bed. The estate architect. An architect? He was hired when your grandfather renovated the West Wing, and he loved Beatrice. Agnes gave a small nod. More importantly, she loved him. Eleanor opened another letter. This one was shorter. Your father knows. Do not trust Harrow. Do not trust the servants he has brought into the house. And if anything happens to me, remember the chapel wall. Eleanor looked up. The chapel? Agnes frowned. Blackthorn has no chapel. Are you certain? I have worked here most of my life. Eleanor handed her the letter. Agnes read the final line again. The chapel wall. A sharp sound came from behind them. Eleanor turned. The bedroom door had closed. Agnes stood immediately. Eleanor tried the handle. Locked. Wonderful. Eleanor, do not panic. I am not panicking. You look very much as though you are. Eleanor pushed the hidden key into the lock. It did not fit. She examined the door. No interior keyhole. Then a faint current of air brushed across her cheek. She turned. The window was shut. The fireplace was dead. Yet the air had come from somewhere behind the bed. Eleanor lifted her lamp. The wallpaper there was faded with age, but one section moved slightly. She stepped closer and pressed it. Hollow, Agnes whispered. No! Eleanor pulled aside the bed curtain. A narrow seam ran vertically through the paneling. She pressed harder. A concealed door opened inward. Behind it was a passage barely wide enough for one person. Cold air flowed from the darkness. And scratched into the stone wall beside the entrance were words. Not faded, not ancient, fresh. Eleanor raised the lamp. Agnes lead. The old woman gasped. Eleanor slowly turned toward her. Agnes had gone completely pale. What? Eleanor asked. Did you not tell me? Agnes stared at the words on the wall. Agnes lead. For the first time since Eleanor had met her, the older woman seemed incapable of speech. Eleanor lowered the lamp slightly. You knew about this passage. Agnes closed her eyes. Yes. The answer landed harder than Eleanor expected. You told me you never knew why my uncle locked this room. I did not know everything. That is not what I asked. Agnes opened her eyes again. Rain beat against the window behind them. I knew about the passage. And I knew Beatrice used it. Eleanor stepped toward her. Start at the beginning. Agnes looked suddenly exhausted. I was 14 years old. I was frightened of your grandfather, frightened of losing my mother's employment, frightened of nearly everyone in this house. That does not explain the lie. No. Agnes looked toward the secret opening, but perhaps this will. She took the lamp from Eleanor and entered the passage. Eleanor followed. The corridor descended gradually between stone walls. It was narrow, damp, and clearly older than the manor's western addition. After 20 paces, they reached a small chamber. A wooden table stood against one wall. On it rested an empty bottle, a rusted lantern, and the remains of a leather satchel. Agnes touched the table. Beatrice brought me here the afternoon before she disappeared. Eleanor said nothing. She told me Thomas Gray had discovered something during the renovations. What? A sealed chamber beneath the old foundation. The chapel? Agnes nodded. Blackthorn once belonged to a monastery. Most of it was destroyed centuries ago, but part of the chapel survived beneath the western grounds. Eleanor remembered Thomas's letter. Remember the chapel wall. What was hidden there? Documents. What kind? Beatrice would not say, only that they proved Lord Harrow had no right to several estates he claimed as his own. Eleanor frowned. Then this was about land? Land. Money. Reputation. Agnes looked at her. And a marriage. Understanding came slowly. Lord Harrow wanted to marry Beatrice because she knew what Thomas had found. Your grandfather wanted the marriage because Harrow promised the evidence would disappear. Eleanor felt disgust rise in her throat. He intended to trade his daughter for silence. Yes. And Alistair tried to stop him. Yes. Then what happened that night? Agnes looked away. I helped Beatrice escape. Eleanor stared at her. You said you saw her in the room with my grandfather. I did. And afterward? Alistair distracted him. I came through this passage. Her voice trembled now. Beatrice had packed a small bag. Thomas was supposed to meet her beyond the south woods. Did she reach him? Agnes shook her head. No. What happened? When I returned the following morning, Thomas was gone. Gone? His cottage had been searched. His tools were missing. There was blood on the floor. Eleanor's stomach tightened. And Beatrice? No trace. You never found her? Agnes hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Eleanor stepped closer. You did. Agnes's eyes filled with tears. 3 days later. Where? In the old chapel. Eleanor went cold. Was she dead? No. The answer stunned her. She was alive? Yes. Then why did everyone say she disappeared? Because she begged us to. Us? Your uncle and me. Eleanor stared at her. Agnes pressed a hand against her mouth before forcing herself to continue. Beatrice had been injured. She would not say exactly what had happened, only that Lord Harrow's men had found Thomas. And Thomas? She believed he was dead. Eleanor thought of the locked room, the letters, the hidden passage. What did Alistair do? He hid Beatrice here for several weeks. In this passage? In the chapel chamber. Then where did she go? Agnes's expression became almost unbearable to watch. She left England. You are certain? I watched her board the carriage. Where was she going? France first. After that, I never knew. Eleanor looked again at the words on the wall. Agnes Lead. If Beatrice escaped, who wrote that? Agnes shook her head. I don't know. Someone knows what you kept from me. Yes. And they have been inside this passage recently. Agnes said nothing. Eleanor moved the lamp closer to the writing. The scratches were fresh. Beneath the final word, something else had been carved faintly into the stone. An arrow, pointing downward. Eleanor crouched. At the base of the wall was a loose stone. Together, they pulled it free. Inside the hollow sat a small tin box. No dust covered its lid. Eleanor opened it. There was only one item inside, a photograph. She lifted it toward the light. 3 people stood before a stone chapel, a young Alistair, a young Agnes, and between them, Beatrice Vale, alive. Eleanor turned the photograph over. A date had been written across the back, March 17th, 1865, 6 years after Beatrice had supposedly vanished. Beneath it was another sentence. Agnes knows what happened to my child. Eleanor slowly raised her eyes. Agnes had backed against the wall. You told me Beatrice left England. She did. Then she came back. Agnes began to cry. Yes. Eleanor held up the photograph. What child? Agnes whispered the answer. A daughter. Eleanor felt her heartbeat slow. When was she born? Agnes could barely meet her eyes. 1862. 3 years before the photograph. Eleanor calculated automatically, then stopped. Her own mother had died young. Her family history had always been strangely incomplete. But there was something even more troubling. Where is Beatrice's daughter now? Agnes looked directly at her. I do not know. Eleanor did not believe her. Before she could speak, a distant noise traveled through the stone corridor. A door opening. Not behind them. Ahead. Agnes lifted her head sharply. There should be no one down here. Footsteps entered the passage. Slow. Deliberate. Coming toward them. Eleanor raised the lamp. A man's voice emerged from the darkness. You should have left the west room closed, Miss Vale. The voice came closer. Agnes seized Eleanor's arm. We have to go. There is nowhere to go. There is. Agnes pointed toward the far wall of the chamber. Eleanor saw only stone. Then Agnes pressed both hands against a narrow pillar. It shifted. A second passage opened behind it. Move! They slipped through just as lamplight appeared around the bend behind them. Eleanor pulled the stone panel closed. Darkness swallowed them. For several seconds, she could hear nothing but Agnes's breathing. Then footsteps entered the chamber they had just abandoned. A man stopped beside the table. Eleanor held perfectly still. The photograph remained clenched in her hand. A second voice spoke. You said the room was still locked. I said it had been locked. Eleanor recognized neither speaker. The first man answered. Then Vale's niece found the key. Or Belle finally lost her nerve. Agnes stiffened beside Eleanor. There was the sound of wood scraping against stone. They were searching the chamber. Eleanor leaned closer to the crack between the panels. A thin line of light revealed part of a man's coat. Dark green, expensive, not the clothing of a servant or trespasser. Find the box, the man ordered. What if she already has it? Then we recover it before she learns what it means. Eleanor looked at the photograph in her hand. The box. They had come specifically for it. The second man lowered his voice. And the girl? A pause. Then the answer. If Eleanor Vale has inherited her uncle's curiosity, she will become inconvenient. Agnes's fingers tightened around Eleanor's sleeve. Sir, the second man said, people may notice if something happens to her so soon after she arrives. People noticed when Beatrice vanished. A quiet laugh. It changed nothing. Eleanor felt something inside her turn cold. Agnes pulled her farther into the hidden passage. They moved without light, one hand against the wall. After several yards, the voices faded. Only then did Agnes strike a match. A narrow staircase descended before them. Eleanor whispered, "Who is he?" Agnes extinguished the match and lit the old lantern hanging from a nail. Harrow. Lord Edwin Harrow would be nearly 80. Not Edwin. Agnes began descending. His son. Eleanor followed. Sir Julian Harrow. Yes. The name was familiar. Sir Julian had inherited what remained of the Harrow estate after his father died. Eleanor remembered hearing that he was respected in the county, a magistrate, landowner, donor to the church. He was a child when Beatrice disappeared. 11 years old. Then why is he protecting his father's secret? Agnes glanced back. Because some secrets become more valuable with age. The stairs ended at an underground stone corridor. Here the masonry changed. Rounded arches, carved pillars, fragments of faded religious symbols. The chapel. Eleanor whispered. Agnes nodded. They entered what remained of an ancient crypt. A collapsed altar occupied one end. Roots hung through cracks in the ceiling. At the opposite wall stood a carved stone panel, depicting an angel holding an open book. Eleanor walked toward it. Thomas said to remember the chapel wall. Agnes raised the lantern. Beatrice searched this place for years. For what? The documents Thomas found. You said they proved Harrow had stolen estates. That was only part of it. Eleanor turned. Agnes looked at the photograph. When Beatrice returned in 1865, she finally told your uncle the whole truth. What truth? Lord Edwin Harrow had been forging deeds for years. He acquired land from families who never knowingly sold it. When owners challenged him, records disappeared. And my grandfather? Helped him. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Of course. That explained the marriage. If Beatrice married Harrow, the two families could bury everything together. What happened to the evidence? Thomas hid it before he died. You are certain he died? Agnes nodded. Alistair found his body in the river months later. Eleanor looked toward the angel, and no one found the papers. No one. She ran her fingers over the carving. The angel's book contained several words in Latin. Most had eroded, but one remained clear. Veritas. Truth. Eleanor pressed the book. Nothing happened. She pushed harder. A click sounded inside the wall. Agnes inhaled sharply. The entire stone panel shifted forward. Behind it was a cavity. Inside sat a leather document case. Eleanor stared at it. 30 years of fear. 30 years of locked doors. 30 years of people pretending a woman had simply disappeared. All for this. She lifted the case. The leather cracked beneath her fingers. Inside were dozens of deeds, letters, ledgers, and sworn statements. One document bore Lord Edwin Harrow's signature. Another bore her grandfather's. Eleanor skimmed the first page. Her stomach tightened. This could destroy the Harrow family. Yes. Then why didn't Alistair expose them? Agnes did not answer. Eleanor looked at her. There is still something you haven't told me. Agnes's eyes fell toward the photograph. The evidence was not the reason your uncle kept the West Room closed. What was? Beatrice's daughter. Eleanor felt that same unease return. Where is she? Agnes looked at her for a long time, then said, You have spent your entire life believing Margaret Vale was your mother. Eleanor stopped breathing. Agnes continued quietly. She wasn't. The lantern flame flickered. Eleanor stared at her. No. Margaret raised you. No. She loved you as her own. Stop. But Beatrice was your mother. The words seemed to remove the floor beneath her. Eleanor stepped backward. That is impossible. You were born in 1862. Eleanor shook her head. My birthday is April 1865. That was the date Margaret gave you. Why? To hide you. From whom? Agnes looked toward the passage behind them. From the Harrows. A stone scraped somewhere above, then another. Sir Julian's voice echoed through the ruined chapel. Thank you, Miss Vale. Eleanor turned. He stood beneath the archway with a pistol in his hand. Two men were behind him. His eyes settled on the leather case. You have just found what my family has been searching for since before you were born. Sir Julian Harrow stepped fully into the ruined chapel. He was a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired, clean-shaven, and dressed with the severe elegance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The pistol in his hand looked almost unnatural beside the gold watch chain crossing his waistcoat. Almost. Put the case on the altar, he said. Eleanor did not move. Sir Julian sighed. Please do not mistake my manners for hesitation. Agnes stepped between them. You have no right to be here. Julian smiled faintly. Mrs. Bell, after 30 years of lying, I would have expected you to recognize the weakness of that argument. You knew Beatrice survived. I suspected. His eyes returned to Eleanor. My father suspected too. Eleanor held the leather case against her chest. Did he kill Thomas Gray? Julian's expression barely changed. My father gave orders. Men interpreted them. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you are likely to receive. Eleanor looked at the two men behind him. Neither met her eyes. Hired men, perhaps local, perhaps people who would later claim they had seen nothing, exactly as the servants had done 30 years earlier. You have spent decades searching for these papers, Eleanor said. Indeed. Why not simply destroy the chapel? Because my father never knew precisely where Gray hid them. Collapsing the foundation might have buried them permanently. Julian nodded toward the case. And documents are useful things, Miss Vale. Dangerous in one hand, valuable in another. So this is about money. It is always partly about money. And partly? His smile disappeared. Legitimacy. Eleanor frowned. Julian looked toward Agnes. Did you not tell her everything? Agnes said nothing. That is becoming a habit of yours. Tell me what? Eleanor demanded. Julian took another step. The forged deeds are damaging, embarrassing, possibly criminal, even after all these years. He pointed toward the case. But among those papers is something far worse. Eleanor opened the leather flap. Agnes whispered, "Don't." Julian's pistol rose slightly. Careful. Eleanor ignored him. She searched through the documents until she found an envelope sealed with faded black wax. Across the front, Thomas Gray had written, "To Alistair Vale, should Beatrice or I fail." Eleanor broke the brittle seal. Inside was a marriage certificate. She read the names, Thomas Gray, Beatrice Ann Vale. Eleanor looked up. They married. Agnes nodded. Secretly. When? 3 weeks before she disappeared. Eleanor returned to the certificate. Thomas Gray had not been merely Beatrice's lover. He had been her husband, her lawful husband. Then Eleanor found another paper, a baptism record. Her hands began to tremble. Eleanor Beatrice Gray, born June 3, 1862. Daughter of Thomas Gray and Beatrice Gray, née Vale. The chapel seemed to tilt around her. Her name had always been Eleanor Margaret Vale. At least, that was the name she had been given. But here was another Eleanor. Her. Agnes stepped toward her. Your mother wanted you protected. By lying to me? By keeping you alive. Julian laughed quietly. That is the sentimental version. Eleanor looked at him. What is the other version? Your mother did not merely disappear because she feared my father. Julian's gaze settled on the baptism record. She disappeared because your existence threatened the inheritance of both families. Eleanor shook her head. I was the daughter of an architect. An architect with better blood than you were told. Eleanor stared at him. Julian continued. Thomas Gray's father was Edward Gray, Earl of Wexford. Agnes closed her eyes. Eleanor felt another shock. Thomas had been noble-born. His younger son, Julian said, disowned after refusing the life chosen for him. He became an architect and used his mother's surname publicly. And that matters because Edward Gray's elder son died without children. Julian's voice became colder. Thomas became the legal heir. Eleanor understood. And after Thomas died, you. The single word echoed through the chapel. Eleanor looked down at the baptism certificate. A penniless governess dismissed for theft that morning. By blood and law, perhaps heir to something entirely different. How much land? She asked. Julian smiled without warmth. Enough. Agnes spoke. The Wexford estate bordered Harrow land. Bordered? Eleanor repeated. Julian answered. Much of what people now call Harrow land once belonged to Wexford. The forged deeds, the missing records, the marriage, everything connected. My grandfather and your father stole Wexford property. Your grandfather participated in arrangements that benefited both families. Do not perfume theft with polite language. For the first time, Julian's expression hardened. You sound exactly like Beatrice. Good. Silence followed. Then Eleanor asked, "Where is she?" Agnes looked at the floor. Julian smiled. That frightened Eleanor more than the pistol. You truly do not know. Eleanor turned sharply toward Agnes. What does he mean? Agnes began to cry again. I promised her. Promised her what? That I would never tell you unless there was no other choice. We passed that point hours ago. Agnes reached inside her coat. Julian immediately aimed the pistol. Slowly. She withdrew a small envelope, not a weapon, a letter. The paper was worn from being carried for years. Agnes held it toward Eleanor. Your mother wrote this 12 years ago. Eleanor stared. 12 years? She was alive? She may still be. Eleanor's throat tightened. Where? Agnes glanced at Julian, then back at Eleanor. She returned to England under another name. Julian's face lost its composure. Agnes. The warning was unmistakable, but Agnes continued. She has been living less than 20 miles from Blackthorn. Eleanor could barely speak. Where? Agnes opened her mouth. A gunshot exploded through the chapel. Stone shattered beside her. Agnes screamed and fell. Eleanor dropped the case and rushed to her. Agnes! I missed intentionally, Julian said. Smoke curled from the pistol barrel. Next time I will not. Eleanor looked down. Agnes was alive. A fragment of stone had cut her temple, but the bullet had struck the wall. Julian extended his free hand. The papers. Eleanor slowly stood. You are afraid of a woman you have not seen in 30 years. No. Julian's voice was quiet. I am afraid of what happens if the county learns she is still alive. Eleanor picked up the document case, then stopped. Behind Julian, through the broken chapel arch, a shadow moved. A figure had entered the passage without a sound. Eleanor saw a weathered face, white hair, a dark traveling cloak. The woman raised an old hunting pistol and pressed its barrel against Julian Harrow's back. Then you should have been more careful, she said. Julian froze. Eleanor stared at the stranger. The woman's eyes were gray, exactly like her own. She looked at Eleanor for a long moment. Then her voice broke. Hello, Nell. Eleanor stopped breathing. No one had called her that since childhood. The woman lowered her eyes briefly, as though gathering 30 years of courage. I am Beatrice Gray. She looked up again. And I am your mother. Eleanor stared at the woman holding the pistol. For years, she had imagined death as something final. Her mother had died when Eleanor was a child. That was what she had been told. There had been a grave in Yorkshire, a black dress, a clergyman, an aunt who had taken her hand and said Margaret Vale was finally at peace. Now a living woman stood 10 feet away and claimed that entire history was a lie. No, Eleanor whispered. Beatrice's expression tightened. I know. No. Eleanor stepped backward. You do not get to walk out of a tunnel after 30 years and say that. Julian Harrow moved slightly. Beatrice pressed the pistol harder into his back. Do not. He stopped. Agnes pushed herself upright against the wall. Blood ran from the cut at her temple. Eleanor! Eleanor turned on her. You knew. Agnes said nothing. You both knew. Beatrice lowered her eyes. Yes. Eleanor laughed once. There was no humor in it. All of you have spent my entire life deciding what I was allowed to know. Because knowledge could have killed you, Beatrice said. So ignorance was kinder? No. The answer came immediately. Never kinder. That stopped Eleanor. Beatrice looked older than Agnes, though perhaps she was not. Years had marked her face deeply. But Eleanor could see it now. The shape of the eyes. The line of the jaw. Even the way Beatrice held herself when angry. It was like looking at an older version of a face Eleanor had spent her life seeing in mirrors. Why did you leave me? Beatrice inhaled slowly. Because Harrow's men were looking for Thomas's child. Julian gave a quiet scoff. Beatrice struck him sharply between the shoulders with the pistol. You may speak when I ask you." Eleanor almost would have admired her under different circumstances. Beatrice continued, "When your father died, I believed they would come for me next. Alistair arranged papers showing that Margaret was your mother. She took you away from Blackthorn. Margaret knew? She raised you because I asked her to." Eleanor's eyes burned. "She loved me. I know. She was my mother." Beatrice flinched. "Yes." The answer softened something and broke something else. Eleanor looked away. "Then why come back? I never truly left." "What does that mean?" "I lived under another name, sometimes in Scotland, sometimes on the coast." Her voice became quieter. "But every few years I returned to Ashcombe." Eleanor remembered the candles, the fresh wood, the footprints. "You were in the manor." "Yes." "You lit the candles." "Yes." "And the drawing under the door?" Beatrice shook her head. "No." Eleanor froze. "Then who did?" No one answered. Even Julian looked confused. Beatrice's expression sharpened. "I came to Blackthorn yesterday after I learned Alistair had died. I entered through the chapel passage." "Did you write Agnes Lead?" "No." Agnes stared toward the corridor. A new unease spread through the chamber. Eleanor looked at Julian. "Your men. They knew nothing about the hidden passage until tonight." "That left someone else, someone who knew the room, someone who knew Agnes's secret, someone who wanted Eleanor to find the truth." Before she could pursue it, Beatrice turned Julian toward the altar. "Kneel." He laughed. "You cannot possibly think you can keep me here." "I do not need to." She pulled a length of cord from inside her coat. Agnes almost smiled. "You came prepared." "I have had 30 years." Together, Agnes and Beatrice tied Julian's wrists behind him. His 2 men had vanished during the confrontation, apparently deciding their wages were not worth being shot underground. Eleanor noticed. So much for loyalty. Julian's expression became venomous. "You think this ends with a few old papers?" "No," Eleanor said. She picked up the document case. "It begins with them." Julian looked at her. "You were dismissed for theft this morning, were you not?" Eleanor went still. Beatrice frowned. "How do you know that?" Julian smiled. And suddenly Eleanor understood. The brooch. Lady Harcourt's cold certainty. The speed with which Eleanor had been removed. "You arranged it." "I arranged an opportunity." "Why?" "To make you desperate." Julian leaned back against the altar. "Your uncle had changed his will. I learned only recently that Blackthorn would pass to you. So you had me dismissed. I expected you to sell. You expected me to come here. I expected you to be frightened by the condition of the estate, accept a generous offer, and disappear." "Your offer?" "Through an intermediary." Eleanor's anger became strangely calm. "And when I did not sell, then other measures became necessary." Beatrice's face hardened. "You framed my daughter." Julian looked at her. "My father taught me that respectable society requires very little evidence before condemning a woman." Eleanor felt the words like a slap, because he was right, not morally, but practically. One missing brooch had destroyed 5 years of good service. One accusation had been enough. She looked at the papers in her hands. "You built your family's security on people being too ashamed to question you." Julian shrugged. "Shame is remarkably efficient." Eleanor walked toward him. "Then I think it is time you experienced some." A bell rang somewhere above them. Once, twice, then again. Agnes looked up. The front bell. "At this hour?" Beatrice extinguished one lantern. "No one should know we are here." Eleanor picked up the remaining lamp. "Someone does." They climbed toward the manor. The front bell continued ringing. When they reached the entrance hall, Eleanor saw a figure through the frosted glass. A man stood outside in the rain. She opened the door. Mr. Pembroke, the solicitor, nearly stumbled across the threshold. His coat was soaked. His spectacles were crooked. and in his hand was a sealed envelope. "Miss Vale," he gasped. "Thank God." Eleanor stared at him. What happened? Pembroke looked over her shoulder. When he saw Beatrice, his face went white. "You." Beatrice lowered her pistol. "You know me?" Pembroke swallowed. Then he held the envelope toward Eleanor. "Your uncle instructed me to deliver this only if you opened the west room." Eleanor took it. Across the front, in Alistair Vale's handwriting, were 6 words. "For Eleanor, when the lies finally break." Eleanor carried the envelope into the drawing room. No one suggested returning to the chapel. Sir Julian remained tied to a heavy dining chair near the fireplace, watched by Beatrice with the pistol resting across her lap. Agnes sat beside the hearth, while Mr. Pembroke cleaned the cut on her temple. Rain struck the windows in hard sheets. For a moment, Eleanor simply stared at her uncle's handwriting. Alistair Vale had known this moment might come. He had prepared for it. Perhaps he had prepared for Eleanor herself. She broke the seal. Inside were 12 pages. The first line was addressed directly to her. "My dear Eleanor, if you are reading this, then you have opened the West Room, and therefore I have failed to keep you away from the truth. For that failure, I am more relieved than sorry." Eleanor sat down. Beatrice watched her closely. She continued, "There are sins committed with cruelty, and there are sins committed through cowardice. I have spent most of my life attempting to decide which kind was mine." Eleanor swallowed. The room became silent. Beatrice was never the disgrace our father claimed. She was the bravest of us. When she discovered the alliance between Charles Vale and Edwin Harrow, she wanted to expose them immediately. Thomas Gray agreed. I did not. Eleanor stopped. Beatrice lowered her gaze. "Is it true?" Eleanor asked. "Yes." "What did he do?" Beatrice answered quietly. "He asked us to wait." Eleanor returned to the letter. "I feared scandal. I feared prison for our father. I feared losing Blackthorn. Most shamefully, I feared what respectable men would say about our family. So I asked Beatrice for time. That time cost Thomas his life." No one moved. Sir Julian's expression had lost its smugness. Eleanor continued reading. "Thomas hid the documents beneath the chapel before Harrow's men found him. Beatrice escaped, but the evidence vanished with him, and without it I convinced myself there was nothing useful I could do. This was a lie, I told myself, because it was easier than courage." Eleanor looked toward Beatrice. Her mother's eyes were wet. The letter continued. Years later, Beatrice returned with Eleanor. Eleanor's hands tightened around the page. She asked me to protect the child. I agreed. Margaret agreed as well. We changed records, paid witnesses, and sent Eleanor away under Margaret's name. It was necessary. But necessity became habit, and habit became another form of cowardice. Eleanor stopped reading aloud. She could not. Mr. Pembroke removed his spectacles. Agnes stared into the fire. Beatrice whispered, "Keep going." Eleanor looked at her. "I don't know if I want to." "You deserve the whole truth." Eleanor returned to the page. I watched Eleanor grow from a distance. I knew where she studied. I knew when Margaret died. I knew when she became a governess. I knew when she accepted employment with the Harcourts. Eleanor looked up sharply. "How?" Mr. Pembroke answered. "Your uncle paid me to keep records." Eleanor stared at him. "You knew who I was?" "Only that Mr. Vale wished to know whether you were safe. You never questioned why." "I did." "And?" He refused to answer. Eleanor resumed. "I considered telling her 100 times. Each time I decided the danger remained too great. Perhaps that was true once. Eventually, it was merely an excuse." Eleanor's vision blurred. The next paragraph had been written more heavily. "If Eleanor has opened the West Room, then someone has forced events faster than I planned. That person may be Samuel Finch." Agnes abruptly stood. "No." Eleanor looked at her. "Who is Samuel Finch?" Beatrice's expression had changed too. "Thomas's apprentice." Sir Julian laughed softly. Beatrice turned the pistol toward him. What is amusing? Nothing. But Eleanor saw it. He knew the name. She continued reading. Samuel was 16 when Thomas disappeared. He believed Beatrice and I abandoned his master. He was wrong, but I never convinced him of it. He spent the next 30 years searching for the same evidence as Harrow. Unlike Harrow, Samuel did not want to destroy it. He wanted revenge. Eleanor thought of the charcoal drawing. Agnes Lead. The locks opening by themselves. Not ghosts. Not curses. A person. Someone moving through passages no one else remembered. Where is he now? Eleanor asked. Mr. Pembroke shook his head. I believed him dead. Beatrice did not. You saw him. Eleanor turned. Beatrice nodded. 6 years ago, near York. Why didn't you tell Alistair? I did. Then why does this letter sound uncertain? Because Samuel disappeared again. Agnes sat down slowly. He knew the hidden passages. Yes, Beatrice said. He helped Thomas build some of them. Eleanor returned to Alistair's letter. There were only 2 pages left. There is one matter more important than the Harrows, the deeds, or even Blackthorn. If Beatrice is alive when you read this, do not punish her for leaving you. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Beatrice looked away. She believed distance would keep you alive. I encouraged that belief, because it spared me from facing what I had done. The greater guilt is mine, and if I had courage left in the final months of my life, I would have told you this myself. A final paragraph remained. Eleanor read it silently first, then again. Her expression changed. What? Agnes asked. Eleanor raised the page. My uncle says the papers in the chapel are not enough. Sir Julian's eyes sharpened. Beatrice leaned forward. Eleanor read aloud. Thomas prepared copies. He hid one set in Blackthorn and another with Samuel, but the most important document was neither a deed nor a confession. It was a ledger kept by Edwin Harrow himself. Sir Julian's face went still. There, for the first time, genuine fear. Eleanor saw it. What ledger? No one answered. She stood. Sir Julian. He looked at her. What ledger? His silence was answer enough. Beatrice rose slowly. My father said Edwin kept a private record. Julian said at last. Of what? Payments. To whom? Officials, clerks, magistrates, surveyors. Mr. Pembroke exhaled. A bribery ledger. Julian nodded reluctantly. If it exists. Eleanor looked down at Alistair's letter. The ledger proves not merely that land was stolen, but how. It contains names still respected in this county. Men whose sons now sit in Parliament. That changed everything. This was no longer only a family scandal. It was evidence capable of destroying reputations far beyond Ashcombe. Eleanor read the last lines. Samuel believed Beatrice knew where the ledger was. She did not. Thomas hid it in the one place Edwin Harrow would never willingly enter. Eleanor stopped. Agnes whispered, The West Room. But Eleanor shook her head. No. The final line was more specific. Beneath the room where Beatrice was meant to become Lady Harrow. Beatrice frowned. There was no wedding room. Agnes suddenly lifted her head. Yes, there was. Everyone turned. When Lord Harrow's engagement was announced, your father ordered the old morning room prepared for the ceremony. Beatrice stared at her. What morning room? Agnes looked toward the ceiling. It no longer exists. Eleanor understood before she finished. Because the wall was built over it. Agnes nodded. When the West Wing was renovated, Thomas sealed an older room inside the new structure. A room inside a room. Eleanor remembered the strange dimensions of the corridor. The unusually thick wall behind Beatrice's bed. Thomas Gray had designed the renovation. He could have hidden anything within it. A violent crash came from upstairs. Glass shattered. Then footsteps ran across the gallery. Beatrice raised the pistol. Sir Julian smiled. Eleanor looked at him. You expected someone. No. His smile widened. But perhaps Samuel Finch expected you. Another crash. Then a man shouted from above. Eleanor Vale. The voice was old. Ragged. Furious. Eleanor stepped into the entrance hall. A figure stood at the top of the staircase. Tall despite his age. Rain dripping from a long gray coat. A scar crossed his face from temple to jaw. In one hand he held a lantern. In the other, a leather-bound ledger. 30 years, the man said. His eyes moved across Eleanor, Beatrice, Agnes, and finally Sir Julian. 30 years I waited for one of you to stop lying. Beatrice whispered, Samuel. He looked down at Eleanor, then raised the ledger. You want the truth about your family? His voice echoed through Blackthorn Manor. Then come upstairs and learn what your mother did the night Thomas Gray died. No one moved. Samuel Finch stood at the top of the staircase, holding the ledger, as though it weighed more than the house itself. Beatrice was the first to speak. You should have stayed away. Samuel laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. For 30 years, everyone told me that. His gaze shifted to Eleanor. Your mother, your uncle, Harrow, even the men who buried Thomas. Eleanor stepped toward the stairs. What did my mother do? Beatrice seized her arm. Eleanor, no. Eleanor pulled free. I have heard that word enough. She climbed. Samuel watched her approach. Up close, he looked older than she expected. 70 perhaps. His left hand trembled slightly, but his eyes remained clear. He turned toward the west corridor. Come. Beatrice followed. So did Agnes. Mr. Pembroke remained downstairs with Julian. The corridor felt different now, less haunted, more dangerous. Samuel stopped outside the opened west room. You think this was Beatrice's prison? Eleanor looked at him. Wasn't it? No. He entered. Samuel crossed to the wall behind the bed and struck the paneling with the heel of his hand. Hollow. Thomas built this section himself. Beatrice's face tightened. I never knew. You were not meant to. Samuel removed a narrow metal tool from his coat and slid it into a seam. The panel released. Behind it was another door. Smaller, older. Samuel pushed it open. A cramped chamber lay beyond. No windows. No furniture. Only stone walls and a wooden table. On the table stood a rusted iron box. Eleanor entered. This was where the ledger was hidden? Samuel nodded. For 28 years. Then how do you have it? I found it 2 years ago. Agnes stared at him. And you said nothing? I wanted all of you here. Why? Samuel turned toward Beatrice, so she could finally admit what she did. Beatrice stepped into the chamber. I have admitted enough. No. Samuel's voice broke. You admitted that Harrow's men killed Thomas. They did. You never admitted why they found him. Silence. Eleanor looked between them. Mother? The word came strangely. It was the first time she had used it. Beatrice flinched. Samuel continued. Thomas planned to leave Ashcombe that night. He had the papers. He had money. He was going to take Beatrice and disappear. Eleanor waited. But Beatrice went back to Blackthorn. Samuel's eyes filled with anger. She went back to warn Alistair. Beatrice looked at him. To save him. To save the Vale name. No. To save the house. No. Samuel struck the table. The iron box jumped. You delayed Thomas. Beatrice's face collapsed. Yes. The word was barely audible. Eleanor felt something inside her tighten. How long? Beatrice closed her eyes. An hour. Samuel laughed bitterly. 1 hour. He looked at Eleanor. That was enough. Beatrice opened her eyes again. I believed Alistair could help us. He could not. I know that now. Thomas knew it then. Eleanor turned to Beatrice. What happened? Her mother's voice shook. I returned to the manor. I told Alistair everything. He begged me to wait until morning. And you did? For 1 hour. She looked at Eleanor. When I reached the south road, Thomas was gone. Samuel spoke from behind her. Harrow's men had already taken him. Eleanor looked down. The truth was not murder. Not exactly. It was hesitation, fear, the kind of mistake people spent lifetimes trying to rename. What happened to him? Samuel answered. They beat him for the location of the papers. His voice had gone flat. He refused. Eleanor did not ask for more. She already knew the ending. Beatrice moved toward Samuel. I searched for him. You found his body. Yes. And then you left. I had a child to protect. Samuel looked at Eleanor. That is what she told herself. Eleanor raised her eyes. Stop. Samuel stared at her. You asked for the truth. I asked for facts. Her voice hardened. Not 30 years of your hatred. Samuel went still. Eleanor stepped closer. My mother made a terrible choice. Beatrice closed her eyes. But Thomas was killed by the men who chose violence. Samuel's mouth tightened. She brought him within their reach. And Harrow ordered his death. Eleanor pointed toward the ledger. If you have spent 30 years searching for justice, then stop confusing guilt with grief. Samuel stared at her. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. Eleanor held out her hand. The ledger. He did not give it to her. What will you do? Expose them. All of them? All whose crimes can still be proven. You would destroy your own family name. Eleanor looked around the hidden chamber. The Vale name had given her secrets. The Harrow name had given her enemies. The Grey name had given her a father she had never known. None of them had given her a life. I spent 5 years teaching children in a house where one missing brooch was enough to erase my character. She looked at Samuel. I have no interest in preserving names. Slowly, Samuel handed her the ledger. Eleanor opened it. Page after page listed payments, dates, properties, officials, amounts. At the center was a section marked Wexford. Several estates had been transferred to Harrow control through forged deeds. One entry bore Charles Vale's signature. Another recorded a payment to a clerk for altering Thomas Gray's inheritance records. And near the end, Eleanor found something else. A payment made 3 weeks earlier, to Lady Harcourt's personal secretary. Eleanor stared at it. The brooch. Proof. Samuel saw her expression. What? Eleanor showed him. Harrow had paid for her dismissal, exactly as Julian admitted, but now she could prove it. She closed the ledger. Good. Beatrice looked at her. Good? For once, someone wrote the lie down. By sunrise, Mr. Pembroke had sent messengers to the county magistrate and to a solicitor in London, whose name appeared nowhere in the ledger. Julian Harrow was furious when he realized what Eleanor intended. You think they will believe a disgraced governess? Eleanor stood before him in the entrance hall. No. His smile returned. Then she placed the ledger on the table. I think they will believe your father's handwriting. The smile vanished. And Thomas Gray's marriage certificate. She added it. And the forged deeds. Another document. And the record of payment used to have me dismissed. Julian said nothing. Eleanor leaned closer. You were right about one thing. What? Respectable society needs very little evidence to condemn a woman. She straightened. Fortunately, I have rather more than that. The scandal spread beyond Ashcombe within weeks. Several Harrow deeds were challenged. 2 families recovered land lost decades earlier. A former county clerk confessed to altering records. Sir Julian denied everything until Thomas Gray's documents were independently authenticated. That denial lasted 11 days. His reputation lasted 3 more. The charge against Eleanor at the Harcourt estate disappeared even faster. Lady Harcourt sent a letter expressing deep regret. Eleanor burned it without answering. Samuel Finch left Ashcombe before winter. He did not apologize to Beatrice. Beatrice did not ask him to. Some wounds were not repaired by conversation. They were simply no longer allowed to decide the future. Agnes remained at Blackthorn. So did Beatrice. Not comfortably at first. There were breakfasts where Eleanor barely spoke to her, afternoons where Beatrice attempted to explain a memory, and Eleanor left the room. Truth had returned them to each other. It did not instantly make them family. That required something slower. Choice. Blackthorn Manor required the same. Eleanor sold one disputed parcel restored to the Grey estate and used the money to repair the roof, then the windows, then the eastern rooms. The dead gardens were cleared. The fountain ran again the following spring. She refused to restore the west room exactly as it had been. Instead, she removed the locks, all three. The hidden chamber became an archive. The forged deeds, letters, marriage certificate, and copies of the Harrow ledger were stored there permanently. Above the door, Eleanor placed a small brass plaque, not with the Vale crest, not the Grey crest, only 2 words, no secrets. One evening, almost a year after Eleanor had first arrived in the rain, Beatrice found her standing in the doorway. The setting sun filled the west corridor with warm light. "No candles tonight?" Beatrice asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "No need." Beatrice stood beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Beatrice asked, "Do you regret opening it?" Eleanor looked into the room that had frightened an entire village for 30 years. No. Even knowing what it cost? Eleanor thought of Thomas, Alistair, Margaret, Samuel, Agnes, the frightened governess who had arrived with one suitcase and nowhere else to go. Then she looked at her mother. For 30 years, everyone believed the safest thing was to keep the door closed. She reached for the handle, and every year, the truth became more dangerous. Eleanor pushed the door completely open. Beyond it, morning dust no longer waited. There were shelves now, books, sunlight, a writing desk beside the window. A room that had once existed only to preserve silence had become the brightest room in Blackthorn Manor. Eleanor stepped inside. Behind her, the door remained open.